Today's good question is, what is the petrodollar and how could it affect me? Well, it sounds like a currency. The term petrodollar actually refers to the system of buying petroleum exports using U.S. dollars. In 1945, President Franklin D. Roosevelt reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia to provide aid, and in exchange, they would price their oil exports in U.S. dollars. In the 1970s, that system expanded to other oil-producing countries. It's been the standard ever since. Now, recently, countries like Russia and China have signaled that they would prefer to purchase oil using their currencies, the yuan and the ruble, which could lessen the importance of the dollar globally. Now, in March, Forbes reported that Russia, China, and Brazil had all used their own currencies to conduct oil transactions. Sanctions against Russia because of the war in Ukraine have also influenced those decisions. Now, despite these moves, Forbes says, quote, the petrodollar remains the dominant currency for trades in oil and petroleum products. But if its use declines, that could have an impact on the value of the dollar globally. If you have a good question, you can email goodquestion@wkyt.com. I'll see you on WKYT Mornings.